Okay, we're up to game 8 of Logical Chess Move by Move. And this game features some brilliant attacking play by white, featuring a rook swing, a sacrifice, really instructive stuff, so let's dive right in. We get d4, knight f6, knight f3, e6, and e3. So white is playing the colle system. This is a solid way for white to play, where often the moves are quite similar from one game to the next. There's a standard setup. You play bishop to d3, knight b d2, castle kingside, and look to play e4. A lot of players like it for this reason. It's quite easy to learn, and it also gives quite good attacking prospects, as we're going to see. So black goes for d5, and white just continues with the normal colle system setup with bishop to d3, and now black strikes with c5. Black really needs to generate counterplay, and c5 is a great way of doing that. You've got to challenge white's center, and white plays the best move here, c3, just reinforcing that center. If you play the colle system and you come up against this c5, then a good rule of thumb is to respond to c5 with c3. So we get knight b d7, knight b d2. The bishop develops to an active square, preparing to castle kingside. White does castle kingside, and so does black. Now in the book, the author says that perhaps black would have been better advised to delay castling because white is setting up for an attack on the kingside, and maybe it was better to wait. But actually castling is the best move, and it's also very natural, so can't fault black there. If you're enjoying the video so far, it would be great if you could subscribe to the channel. I'll be continuing the series on Logical Chess Move by Move very soon, so by subscribing, you won't miss out on the future videos. We get rook e1. You can see how all of white's forces are aimed at making the e4 pawn break. The bishop, the knight, the rook, all of it's designed to play e4. And we're going to see that very soon. Black plays queen to c7. The author says that this is an ideal place for the queen, although black does need to be worried if the c-file opens up. If these two pawns were removed, there can be a possible rook to c1. And the c-file probably will open up. Like in most cases, that is what's going to happen. Eventually, either black is going to capture on d4, or white will capture on c5. And in that case, maybe the queen isn't so well placed on c7. So we get e4. This is the move that white has been aiming towards all this time. And now black does initiate the capture on d4, as I was mentioning. Now, white captures back with the pawn. You shouldn't capture back with the knight, of course, because in that case you lose control of the h2 square, and black wins a pawn with check. So taking with the pawn is much better. Black captures on e4, and now white recaptures with the knight. If we go back here, this knight does look a bit awkward on d2, and I think if you don't play the colle system, you might not understand why you'd put it there. After all, it blocks the development of the dark squared bishop. But the knight on d2 springs to life after e4 is played. Black will probably capture, and then the knight comes out. If black doesn't capture, by the way, like let's say that black were to play something else, well, there is a threat here of playing e5. So let's say that black just pulls the bishop back. Well, then you do play e5, and now this knight has got to move somewhere, let's say back to e8. And if you play the colle system, you now might be wondering what to do with this knight. Well, I think in this case you get it into the game via the f1 square. Knight f1, maybe knight to e3 or to g3, so that's where the knight should go in that case. By the way, I help ambitious adult improvers to understand new openings that they want to learn. So if you'd like to explore working together, go ahead and click the link in the description below. It's the pinned comment or the first line of the description, and we can see if working together will be a good fit. But anyway, let's get back to the game, because after black captured on e4, white recaptured with the knight, and we've got an interesting pawn structure here, and quite a typical pawn structure that every strong chess player needs to know about. This is known as the isolated queen's pawn. It's isolated because white has lost the c-pawn and the e-pawn on either side. There's no c-pawn, there's no e-pawn, and therefore this pawn is isolated and could become weak. Now it's double-edged though, because although this pawn could become weak particularly in an endgame for white. As more pieces are traded, this pawn becomes weaker. In the meantime, white can have better attacking chances, or whichever side has the isolated queen's pawn can have better attacking chances. This pawn provides some extra central space, and there's also the idea sometimes of advancing it, which can create some other problems. But if it's on d4, it's probably going to mean that white should aim for an attack, and that's what we're going to see. So we get b6. This makes a lot of sense. The light squared bishop wants to get into the game, and it's quite tough to get it into the game on this diagonal because the e6 pawn is blocking it. So the idea is bishop to b7. We get bishop to g5. White is just completing their development. But there's also another idea behind this. The secondary idea is to free this c1 square for the rook to come to. Remember, I said this before, if the c file opens up, then rook to c1 can be an idea, and that's exactly what's happened. With the black queen on c7, well, white can play rook to c1, gain a tempo, improve the rook, and force the queen away somewhere. So we get a capture on e4, and now this is a key moment. I think this is really one of the most important moments of the game, how white chooses to take back here. I think most natural is to take back with the bishop, because, well, it looks like you're winning a tempo against the rook in the corner. And also, I guess minor pieces generally develop in the center before rooks do. That gives away the answer of what actually happened in the game. I guess after bishop to e4, black can just play bishop to b7, and there's not too much going on here. Maybe rook to c1, and black's queen has to move, but this is an equal position. You can see the evaluation bar, slightly better for white. But after the way that white did recapture with the rook, we can see that white has now got a good advantage. Now this maneuver, bringing the rook up, this is called the rook swing, and it can be a typical idea not only in the colle system, but in many cases where white is looking to attack, with a bishop on d3, with most of black's pieces on the queen side. White is going to be trying to launch an attack against the black king, and the rook is going to play a part in that, as we're going to see. So we get bishop to b7, that attacks the rook, and instead of moving the rook out of the way immediately, white does something very clever here. He responds to this threat with a bigger threat. This is a good way to play. If you see one of your pieces threatened, then try not to move it out of danger immediately. Instead, try and ramp up the pressure. So this idea, rook to c1, we had it in the back of our pocket, and now we get to play it. So now the queen has to move away to a worse square, and white looks to intensify the attack. Rook to h4. Now there's pressure against h7 in a couple of different ways. And when you put pressure on the enemy king side like this, there's a good chance that the opponent will crack. Now black really has to move one of their kingside pawns forward, and this is often the way to start an attack. If you play knight to f6 to defend this pawn, well, you can just take the knight off and then capture next move. So that doesn't work. No, so black has to move one of their kingside pawns forward. The question is which one? And whenever you put your opponent into a decision like this, defending, there's a good chance they can make a wrong decision. I mean, which one do you move here? Do you move h6, or do you move g6, or do you move f5? f5 is the best move, but it's still pretty uncomfortable for black because you can target this weak pawn on e6. Let's say that black defends it. That's the best move, by the way, and now there's even more pressure against e6. Not fun for black to defend this. If you'd played instead h6, well, then there's a sacrifice here, and the reason that you can believe that there's a sacrifice, the reason that you can just get the idea that this is something worth looking at, is because all of black's forces, or most of them anyway, are over on the queen side, far away from the king. So that's a signal to consider more strongly a sacrifice, and the sacrifice here is bishop takes h6. So if black doesn't take back, then black has just lost a pawn for nothing. And how do you continue the attack here? Well, it's not with the move that the author suggested in the book. In the book, the author suggested rook takes h6, but this is refuted by bishop to f4 with a fork of the two white rooks. So that was one that the author, Irving Chernev, missed there in the text. Instead, the way to continue this is with a quiet move, and that's queen to d2. So now that attacks the pawn with an extra piece, and there's actually no good way for black to add an extra defender to it. I mean, you can try, but there's no way. So queen takes h6 is coming, and pretty soon there's going to be either checkmate or massive material loss. If you want to improve your attacking chess, then just a reminder that I help adults at the below 2000 ELO level gain the results in the game that they dream about. So if you have interest in that, then do go ahead and click the link in the description, and we can see if that's a good fit for you. So in the game instead, black played g6. Now this has the effect of weakening the dark squares around the black king. This move makes the h6 and f6 squares weak because, well, when the pawn was back on g7, those squares were defended by that black pawn, but with the pawn on g6, that's no longer the case. But then again, black had to move one of the pawns forward, as we saw. So let's see how white continues now. And I think this next move is very classy. Bishop to b5. So this attacks the knight, which you might not think is the best way to continue an attack on the king side, but when you stop and think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. This knight is defending the f6 square. So if you can get rid of that knight, then something like bishop to f6 or an eventual knight into f6 can become more possible to achieve. The other thing is that this actually wins a tempo because the knight is attacked, it's not defended right now, and it doesn't actually have a square that it can move to, quite remarkably. All of the squares that the knight could move away to are covered by white. So black has to go passive defending the knight with queen to e8, placing their queen into a very uncomfortable pin. Now white can capture this knight anytime he wants, but he doesn't do it straight away. I think this is instructive as well. When you've got your opponent in a pin like this, then ramp up the pressure. Don't release the pin. I mean, something like this just makes black's life so much easier, and you can see the evaluation bar react to that. So instead, when you've got this pin, try and bring more forces in to exploit that pin. And that's what white did, starting with knight to e5. Now obviously you can't take this knight on e5 with the black knight because then you just lose the queen. And if you take with the bishop, as the author explains, then that actually opens up the d file, and now the queen is attacking the knight along with the bishop. So how does black defend this? Well, you can't play rook to d8 because that square is covered by white's bishop. So in the book it was suggested perhaps bishop to c8. Well, then you keep on increasing the pressure and eventually black is going to lose this knight. You can't keep adding defenders to it, and this pin is deadly. So back to the game. Knight to e5 was played. What did black do here? It's getting very tough for black. He tried bishop to c8 to add an extra defender to this knight, which is under so much pressure. But now this move makes a lot of sense just on principle. It's rook takes c8. So in general, a trade of 2 minor pieces for a rook is a good trade for the player that gains the 2 minor pieces. So white's giving up a rook here, but white is gaining 2 minor pieces, as we just saw, right? Let's just go back, illustrate this. What's coming off the board for black? It's the bishop and the knight. What's coming off the board for white? It's the rook. So that's a favorable trade for white. So the queen had to move, and now how does white continue here? Well, remember, we've got these weak dark squares around the black king, so we can look to bring our pieces into those weak dark squares with knight to f6. White is actually threatening checkmate here, so black doesn't have time to take this bishop for a number of reasons. Knight to f6 comes, and, well, that doesn't just win the black queen, it actually wins the black king. If the king goes to g7, then it's checkmate this way, and the same idea if the king goes to h8 instead. Rook takes h7 is mate. So that's why in the game, after knight to g4, black played h5, which is another weakening pawn move. White played knight to f6 check anyway. The king moved to g7, and I think the next move for white is one that you should definitely be considering with all of these pieces around the black king. Well, it's a sacrifice. Knight takes h5 check. Again, how can we tell that a sacrifice might be on here? We look at the number of pieces for white around the black king. We look at the number of defenders around the black king. Black's really only got the rook, and it's even questionable whether that rook is really defending because the threats are coming on h5. So white's able to capture on h5. Brilliant move. In comes the queen, and now there's lots of different checkmates threatened here. Black tries to stop them, but it only delays the inevitable. Bishop to h6 check, and that's the point that black resigned. There's a couple of more moves that black can play. You can play king to g8, I suppose, but then it's a pretty quick checkmate this way. Or if you were to take the bishop, then again, it's not going to last very long. That's checkmate as well. If you enjoyed this game review, click here for the next one. Every game from Logical Chess move by move is highly instructive and will help improve your play.